Hi, my name is Marco van Wieren and I am the developer of the WPO365 plugins for WordPress. Plugins that will help you integrate the Microsoft Cloud into your WordPress website. And in today's video I want to show you how easy it is to synchronize users from Entra ID to your WordPress website. Let me start with a very simple example of how a user in Entra ID can be synchronized to WordPress when that user interactively signs in to my WordPress website with their Microsoft credentials. For that, I have installed the WPO365 login plugin, and I can have a look at the configuration by clicking the link either here on the plugins page or in the admin menu of WordPress. And when I navigate to the menu and look at the single sign-on configuration of that plugin, then you can see that I already configured the single sign-on feature using the SAML 2.0 protocol. Well, there is a separate video that explains how you can set up this integration, either with SAML 2.0 or with OpenID Connect. Also, the difference between those is not the topic of this video. But there is enough documentation on the website if you're interested, so I refer you to that. But basically, I've already registered this WordPress website staging WPO365connect.com in Entra ID using an enterprise application that you can see here. And here you can see that on the single sign-on page of this enterprise application that I've integrated basically our WordPress website at staging WPO365connect.com with Entra ID. And we can also have a quick look at the users that are allowed to use this application to sign in. And you can see that no application assignments are found. And if I look at the properties, then you can also see that user assignment is not required. By default, this is actually required, so then I would need to assign users to the application, but in this case, I already changed this to no. So any user in my Entra ID directory can now sign into my WordPress website. Let's have a quick look. I'm looking at the user list of my WordPress website, and you can see that there is only one user, that's me, the administrator. And now I would like to synchronize a user from Entra ID to my WordPress website. So the best way to do that, or the easiest way to do that, let's put it like that, would be to ask that user to sign in. So I can change my tab to the tab of John Demo in my browser. And when John Demo visits the site, you can see that he's simply able to access the front end of that site. But when John would visit the login page and would click the button to sign in with Microsoft, or if John would simply immediately try and navigate to the backend of the website, then you can see that John is able to log in. Even though he hasn't any role, he is just a subscriber at this point, as you can see, because he cannot add any content. But John has been added to my WordPress website as a user. So if I switch back to the admin view and refresh the user list, then I can see that indeed a new user has been created and that the display name of the user has been synchronized with the data for that user from Entra ID. Then the email has been populated and the default role has been set to subscriber. So that's the most simple form of synchronizing data from Entra ID to WordPress. But what if you want more control over who can register with your website? What if you, for example, do not wish that users can self-register? Then you can go to the user registration page and you can uncheck the option for new users to be automatically created in WordPress. So let me uncheck that. Let me save the configuration, and just for the example, let me also delete the user of John Demo. And now it's again a situation where only I am the only administrative user of this website. let me switch tabs and let me go to John's tab. And his session has expired. That's correct. Let's log out and return basically to the login page and try and sign in with Microsoft. Now I get an error that my login cannot be retrieved because the user is not found and the user is also not created. I return to the administrative view and I would go to the WPO365 configuration pages that you can even see a WPO365 health message. Somebody tried to sign in, but that user was not found and the settings prevented that user from being created. So let's close this and let's have a look how I as an administrator can enroll this user to my WordPress website using Entra ID. That's a premium option. So first of all, I would need to go to plugins, installed plugins. And here I've already added the Essentials plugin and I can activate it. What I'm now showing you is basically a function that is unlocked with most premium plugins. So therefore I took a cost-effective plugin, which is the Essentials one, and I just activate it. Now with the premium plugin installed, I can go to my website's user list and click to add a user. And when I do, I see that there is a button here at the top to add a user from Entra ID. And if I click that button, I can actually look up a user by email address. So let's have a look. Let's try and look up demo@wpo365.com and perform the search. Then I see here that there is a exclamation mark. It failed to look up the user with the email address. If I would now return to my WPO365 configuration pages and I would have a look at the debug page, I can see here that there was a warning generated that the plugin could basically not retrieve an access token. There is no possibility to integrate with Microsoft Graph currently. So I would need to enable this type of integration. Now I need to set up the integration so that WPO365 can reach out to Microsoft Graph to look up a user that an administrator will try and add as a user to WordPress. The integration that we set up previously was for single sign-on and it's using SAML. It's using an enterprise application in Microsoft Entra. For this type of integration, we need a so-called app principal. We need to register the WordPress application again in WordPress as an application this time and not as an enterprise application. So I will go to my Entra portal, entramicrosoft.com, which I had already opened because I showed it to you earlier. And now I will continue to the app registrations page. And here I will click to register a new application. And I will call it Video Demo Sync. And I'm happy with the supported account type being a single tenant. Means that basically the scope of this integration is limited to my tenant, which is fine. And for this type of integration, I do not need to specify a redirect URI. That is only needed if I configure OpenID Connect based single sign-on where the user signs in interactively and Microsoft will redirect the user back to the site. But that's not the type of integration I'm configuring here and right now. Right now I want to configure application level integration for the WPO365 plugin to support administrative use cases to synchronize users from Entra ID to WordPress. So let's register the application. Registering the application, the WordPress website, in Entra ID as an application, as an app registration, gives me an application ID, which identifies this application in Entra ID. So I copy that ID to the clipboard and I return to WPO365 to the configuration pages and specifically to the integration configuration page. And here I can configure application access and I enable application access and I paste the ID of the application. The tenant ID I don't need to enter here because it takes the same ID that I already configured for SSO, for SAML based SSO. So that's already known, so I only need to identify the application. I also need to enter an application secret. I need to create that. So let's return to Entra. And let's continue to the certificates and secrets page of the app registration and click to create a new secret. I can add a description and I can change the expiration to anything else than the default 180 days, but I leave it for now at 180 days. And I click to add a new secret. And when I do, I can copy the value of that secret, not the ID. Really, we need the value. And I need to bring that over to the configuration of WPO365. But before I do, I would like to make a note of the expiration date, because that's quite important. If the secret is no longer valid because it expired, then the secret cannot be used anymore and the integration will fail. So you need to make a note of this date, and at least 180 days after you created the secret, or as long as the secret will be valid for, you need to return to this page for this app registration, create a new client secret, much in the way that we just did now, copy the value and return to WordPress to the integration configuration page and paste the secret here for the same client ID. You just need to refresh that secret. So with this configured, I would save the configuration. But at this point in time, I'm not yet done. If I return to Entra, then I can see on the API permissions page that this registered application actually has no other permissions than allowing a user to sign in. But that's not what we want. We can actually, at this point in time, remove this permission. Be aware of the following. You can also configure SSO using the OpenID Connect based protocol. And when you do, then you will have already registered an application. And then you should simply ignore what I'm doing right now, not remove the user read permission, but simply only add a application level permission for the plugin user read all. And add that permission, and then you will have all the permissions here as well. But in this example, I've created a new app registration because we're using the SAML protocol for SSO. But again, if you have already registered your application, then leave everything as it is and just simply add this permission and then grant admin consent. And confirm that you want to grant admin consent. And when that's done, we are basically ready to test our integration. So I will return to WordPress, and here I will return basically to the user add a user form, and I will see whether my integration is working now. So I click to add a user from Entra again. I enter demo at WPO365.com and perform a search. This time it's working. So the integration was successful. The plugin can retrieve an access token and use it to look up a user. So we have a result here, John Demo, and I wish to add John Demo as a user to my WordPress website. And I click add. When I do, then I see that the form is automatically populated. If you have, for any reason, different form variables, form fields, then you have here the option to change how this is configured. You can even add multiple new claims to the user. Well, hide the form for now, and I will simply just add the user. Now John Demo has been added as a user to my website, and I know that I previously disabled also the user registration for users that sign in. So basically when John Demo now would sign in with his Microsoft account, so try again to sign in with Microsoft, and I expect that the user can sign in, and that's indeed the case. So this is another example of how you can synchronize users with more control as an administrator from Entra ID to your WordPress website. Still, that's not all. I can see on my feature dashboard that there is an option to synchronize users from Entra ID to WordPress, on demand or scheduled, like regularly. But I can also see that this option is currently for me not enabled. I would need to select a different plugin, for example the Integrate package. And I can select it from the drop-down, which will take me to the WPO365 website where I can continue and purchase the package. But let's close that for the moment. Let's return to my website, staging.wpo365connect.com, and let's have a quick look at the installed plugins. Previously, I had the Essentials package installed, but I will now deactivate that plugin and instead I will activate the Integrate package. And if I now return to WPO365, to the dashboard, and if I continue immediately to the user sync page here, then I can see that I can now enable this feature, which I will do, to synchronize users at regular intervals by specifying a user synchronization job. So let's do that. Let's say that I would like to add a new job that synchronizes users from Entra ID to WordPress. And let's click to add a job of that type. What I can see is something very unreadable, but I can expand it and I can see that that's just the ID of the job. But I can enter a more, I would say, user-friendly display name. Let's say that I want to synchronize all employees of my company. The next thing that I should specify is the query. That is the query that WPO365 will use when it collects the user, when it wants to retrieve the users from Microsoft Graph. So it's a Microsoft Graph query. And the default query is to get all the users in your organization with their account enabled and that are members in your Entra ID. So you need to verify whether this applies to your situation, whether this collects the correct users, or otherwise update the query that you see here. You can also have a look. There are a few sample queries, and if you expand that, you could also say like, okay, I would like maybe to collect all the nested members of an Entra ID group. And then you can click the plus and it will basically replace the query, but you would need then to add here or replace actually this portion with the group ID of the Entra ID group of which you wish to synchronize the users. So you would need to return to Entra, to all groups. Have a quick look here. You have to look at all the groups and you could, for example, say I want to synchronize all the colleagues, or so you could take that group ID, you can copy that here and you can then return to WPO365 to WordPress and enter, add, paste basically the object ID of the group in the query. And then you could leave the query as it is. So you want to have the transitive members, basically meaning you want the members of the group, but also if that group has members that are groups and those groups, those nested groups have members, then you want also those members to include. That's basically what transitive members means. Or you could basically return to the previous query that we had, my organization, all the users with their account enabled and who are a member. And what you also will notice is there is a top is 10. What this basically means is that once this query runs, it will first of all get the first 10 results for this query. So the first page size, you can say. So you get 10 results and then you can get more. So you get from 10 to 20, from 20 to 30 and so on. So it kind of defines the page size, and that is not all. What it also defines is basically the batch size in which WPO365 will continue to process all the users until finished. but I will get to that a little bit later. Next, I can specify the actions that should be executed when synchronizing users from Entra ID to WordPress. Create users, update existing users, or delete existing users in WordPress that no longer are in scope in the context of the query that we run against Entra ID. But I leave that simply unchecked for the moment, because first of all, I would like to run the query and view what should happen. Kind of see a log result, but don't see the actions being applied to my current state of my WordPress setup. Just to be sure, just as a kind of a check. So I leave that unchecked and I immediately scroll down and I say save and run now. Well, there are only 25 users in my directory, so I'm done fairly quickly. If you have a few thousand of users, then obviously this would take a bit longer. Also, well, you could see that quite clearly. If I click save and run now, you can see that the results are processed in steps of 10 users, 10 and 20, 25. Again, I will come to that a little later when we talk about how do you wish to trigger and how do you wish to make sure that the synchronization runs till the end. Because that is a job that is left to the WordPress cron system, and that also means that all these batches of jobs are processed as WordPress cron jobs, and therefore we need to make sure that it runs continuously, or else you get errors such as an expired next link, etc. But we'll get back to that a little later. For now, I just want to view the results. I ran my query, I ran my user synchronization manually, and now I can view the results. And this gives me an idea of what should have happened. Would I have applied the actions, which I now left unchecked. And here I can see that there was a user with a username of Alan de Jong, and basically WPO365 thinks that is a new domain user, meaning that user was not found in my WordPress website. So it would have created a new user. If I look a little bit further down, I see that demo at WPO365 appears to be an existing domain user. So in this case, it logged an existing user. It would have updated the user, would I have checked that action accordingly. So I can look at the rest of the users. There's another existing domain user, and I can even look a little bit further, and you can see that it's basically all the users are considered to be new, apart from 2 users that were found. Well, let's close it for the moment, and let's have a quick look at the user list in WordPress. And that's correct. You can see that there are 2 users, and both were identified correctly by WordPress or by the WPO365 user synchronization processor. Let's have another quick look. Let's create a new user, test not delete user, please, and let's give this user an email, which is basically non-existing, but for the test that doesn't really matter. Well, let's simply add this new user. So I have now a user who is not in my Entra ID, which is a local WordPress user. If I now return to WPO365, and if I rerun basically with all the options left unchecked the user synchronization, and if I now look at my results again, then I will expect to see that there is an WordPress user, and that basically means that this user will always be skipped. So WPO365 identified a user in your WordPress website that is not a user that's in Entra ID, and therefore it will leave basically this user alone. Now let's have a look what happens for the individual actions. Let's check the option to create users. And let's scroll down and let's run this job one more time. And now I can look at the results. Of course, I can see that the status is created whilst others are logged because I didn't check the option to update. So basically an existing user has not been updated, but instead only been logged. Let's close it and let's have a quick look at the user list in WordPress. And there I can see that now a lot of new users have been added to my WordPress website. So let's also continue to the next page, and there I can also see that the user not to delete is still there, but obviously has not been updated because that user is not in my Entra ID. You can also see that when I return to the WPO365 dashboard, that I get a health message that one user could not be created because the username of that user was too long. Now I can dismiss the error for the moment and return to the user sync page, expand the job. I can actually have a look at the results. And here I could filter for errors. And there I can see that there was a user with a very long user principal name, Knoodle Woodle Foodle. Well, it's a very long name. Let me not try and pronounce that. It's still a new user. The status was an error, and the error I can see here. It could not create the username. The preferred username was very long, and I could see the error as a health message. So I return to the filter for all. I can also see that one user, for example, was skipped. That's actually the user that is left untouched at the moment by this job. Well, let's close this. Let's now select to update users, and let's run the query one more time. Let's run the user synchronization one more time, I should say. Let's have a quick look at the results of the user synchronization job now that I also checked the option to update users. And I can see that 24 out of 26 users have been updated. There was one error, that's the user with the long username, and one user was skipped. That's the user that I manually created. So WPO recognized that this user was not created by the user synchronization job, and also noticed that this user never signed in with their Entra ID account. Let's close that and let's have a look at the next option, or action actually I should say, to delete users. But before I do that, let's quickly explain how WPO365 knows what users were ever created by a user synchronization job or what users ever signed in with their Microsoft Entra ID account. Whenever WPO365 creates or updates a user, and whether that happens during WPO365 user synchronization or when an update is received from Entra ID's application provisioning service, or when a user interactively signs in with their Entra ID account, then WPO365 will always tag that user with their Entra ID object ID. It's basically logging that value, that ID, as user meta for that specific user in the WP user meta table. So now I understand how WPO365 can determine whether or not a specific user in my WordPress user list is managed, well, let's call it managed at least, by WPO365 or not. It's simply checking whether a specific user has been tagged with the Entra ID object ID. And that means that if I want to delete users, which I can basically apply as an action once I check the option here, that WPO will first synchronize the users that it receives from Microsoft Graph by running the query and processing the result. And at the end, when it finished processing all the users that it needed to create or update, it will run another query against all the users in your WordPress user list and will check whether there are any users tagged with their Entra ID object ID that have not been updated by the current run of the WPO365 user synchronization job. Basically, users that are not tagged with the current job ID, but that are tagged with the Entra ID object ID, are users that are no longer in scope. And when I delete users, I can either choose to hard delete those users, and that would be the default basically. And when I choose this option, I would also need to say who to reassign the published content of a user that is to be deleted, who to reassign that content to. So let's say I would like to reassign that to demo@wpo365.com, and let's check whether that username exists. And if it does, then the button will gray out, and otherwise you will receive an error. But actually, for today's demo, I would like to keep it to soft delete the user, to basically deactivate the user. And when I'm deactivating a user, all the roles of that user will be removed. And for the duration that you keep the WPO365 login plugin installed, those users can also not log in to WordPress anymore. So let's leave it at this, and let's now click to save and run the WPO365 user synchronization. And when I now click to view the results, I actually do not expect that any of the users has been deactivated, because my user not to delete is basically not created or updated ever by WPO365. So I'm basically seeing the same result that I saw before when I only checked the option to update it, but not the option to delete user. So my WordPress only user remains untouched. So let's close this and let's have another look at the options available to me. And there you can see that there's an option called custom domains. And at the moment the plugin is skipping a domain check. But I can uncheck that option. And when I do, and when I save that for a moment, and when I continue to the user registration page, then I can see that I have here a list of custom domains. And these are the domains that Entra ID is using to either construct user principal names, so login names for Microsoft 365 and Entra ID, but also to build email addresses from. So if I now return to the user sync page and expand my job and look again at custom domains and my choice to skip the domain check, I may now expect that WPO365, when synchronizing users, is applying a different check. It's basically checking whether a user has a username or an email address that ends with any of the domains in the custom domain list on the user registration page. And that's the case for this user that I created as a WordPress only user. So if I now return to my user sync page, dismiss any errors, and if I expand the job and if I would run it manually with the option to skip the domain check unchecked, and I run it, and if I now look at the results, I would expect that one user has been deactivated. And if I close this overview and if I return to my user list, then I can actually see that the user not to delete at WPO365.com has now been deactivated. So basically the user's role have been removed. I can see that, no roles. And if this user were to try to sign in to my WordPress website, then WPO365 login plugin will prevent that user from signing in. It will get an access denied error. I do have an option, however, to manually reactivate this user. And if I do, then the user will become a subscriber again, or whatever you have configured as a default role. So far, I have always started WPO365 user synchronization manually by clicking the Save and Run Now button. I can, however, also choose to start it on a schedule. basically I could activate the WordPress cron option, and I would say that I would like to have it run every day of the week at 1 a.m. in the middle of the night, basically. And I could say save and schedule. And when I do, I need to realize, or actually I need to be aware of how WordPress cron exactly works. It's kind of a task manager. You can define tasks, and those tasks are managed by WordPress. And each time that a page or post of your website is requested by a user somewhere out there in the internet, then WordPress checks also whether there are jobs to complete. So WordPress cron works fine when your website has a lot of traffic. But at 1 o'clock in the night, there's probably no one visiting your site, apart from some bots probably. But nobody's visiting your site, and then you need yourself to make sure that WordPress cron is still running continuously. One option to ensure that your site's WP cron is running, near continuously would be by using the Uptime Robot website. I'm using that for basically all my sites because it's also a great way of monitoring whether a site is up and running and getting an alert when that is not the case. And instead of just requesting the front end page or post, or basically the homepage URL, I'm always requesting the wp-cron.php page, because this page is basically the trigger for WP cron. So if I call this page every minute, then I can rest assured that my website's WP cron system is running at least every minute. Every minute, WP cron is checking whether there's a task to complete. Now that I am sure that my WP cron is running like almost continuously, I can rest assured that this job will start around 1 a.m. in the night. So that's great. But that's not all. I need WP cron to run near continuously, because after the first job completes, only 10 users will be processed. And after 10 users are processed, WPO365 user synchronization will create a new WP cron job to be processed as soon as possible to process the next batch of users. So that basically means that if you need to synchronize, I would say 1,000 users, and we have a page size, a batch size of 10 users, then it means that 100 jobs need to be processed. So that would mean that 1,000 users would take around, let's say 10 users per minute would take around 100 minutes to process. I can imagine that 100 minutes for 1,000 users sounds like a lot. And you could try and change the page size, for example, to 20 users. And by doing so, you would halve the processing time. So 100 minutes becomes 50 minutes, less than an hour. So that sounds reasonable. Just be sure that and make sure that your server is not running into a PHP timeout. When it has too much to do and it can't process it before the PHP timeout is reached, it's normally around 30 seconds, then the process will basically not run to a proper end. It will be stopped and user synchronization will not work as expected. So keep that in mind and make sure you test that profoundly. There are other options to start the user synchronization. For example, using an external link. If you're using an external cron system, you could take this link and trigger this link from your external task manager. Last but not least, can you activate an option for WPO365 to send the log, the WPO365 user synchronization, to a specific email address. Let's say I want to send it to WPO365.com. And I have another option, once I enable the option to send the log, to only send the log when errors occurred. So I can also check that option. I can again then click to save this. And when I've done then basically I can rest assured that I get informed when errors occur. I know that I already said that last but not least, but the very last thing is the user reactivation. I need to check this option and save basically the configuration if I want the WPO365 user synchronization process to reactivate users that again come into scope. So if there's a user that's deactivated, and if that user again turns out to be in scope, then I would need to have checked the option to enable the user reactivation for WPO to remove the deactivation of the user. And this really brings me to the end of this video. If you have any questions or if anything is unclear, then please click here. Click on the question mark and it will take you to the contact form on our website. And use it to get in touch and to explain what you need help with. You may expect an answer, a reply within 24 hours during the week or 48 hours in the weekends. And now that I have your attention anyway, please make sure that you visit our page in the WordPress plugins directory and leave your 5-star review. It's much appreciated by us, but it's also very helpful for others to find the best plugin to connect the exciting Microsoft Cloud with a WordPress website. Thank you for watching.